Today, it's loud, it's wild, it's a show. But before all of that, before the headgear, before the chaos, before the catchphrases, there was a coach with a sharp mind, wild energy, and a love for the spotlight. In 1987, ESPN needed something different. College football was already big, but it wasn't yet a spectacle. It needed a spark, a personality, a reason to tune in before kickoff. So they brought in Lee Corso, not just to analyze, but to connect. Not for the hardos, but for the people that weren't watching yet. Someone who could bring in a new segment of fans and make them feel like they belong. 30 years later, ESPN did it again with Pat McAfee, a loud, unpredictable former player brought in to shake up the set and pull in a new generation. The blueprint? It started with Corso. He was Pat McAfee before Pat McAfee. It was 1987. Miami ran college football. Deion Sanders was still returning punts for Florida State. And Nick Saban, he was a defensive assistant at Toledo. But that's when it started, before anyone realized that it would become a Saturday tradition. Lee Corso joined College GameDay, and college football has never been the same since. What was happening in college football? Well, the national champion was the Miami Hurricanes. Led by Jimmy Johnson, the Canes went 12-0 and won the national title over Barry Switzer's Oklahoma. Known for swagger, style, and physical dominance, embodying a growing divide between the old school and the new school football. The number one NFL draft pick in 1988 was Andre Bruce, linebacker from Auburn. The SEC was gaining steam, but the Big Ten and the Pac-10 still had more historical prestige. The national champion was determined by the polls. No BCS, no computers, just opinions. No game day on the road. Game Day was still a studio show in Bristol, and Corso joined as a relatively unknown media personality. Where were today's Game Day cast? Chris Fowler had recently joined ESPN and was primarily working as a host and reporter for Scholastic Sports America, a show covering high school athletics. He would join Game Day in 1990. Reese Davis was a student at Alabama working towards a journalism degree. Kirk Herbstreit was a high school quarterback in Centerville, Ohio. He would commit to Ohio State and redshirt in 1988. Desmond Howard was a high school junior in Ohio. He would commit to Michigan in 1988 and win the Heisman in 91. David Pollock was in kindergarten. He grew up to play at Georgia and joined Game Day as an analyst in 2011. Pat McAfee, yeah, he hadn't even been born yet. Some cultural context for you, the president was Ronald Reagan, his final year leading our country. Top-selling video game, The Legend of Zelda. And there was no internet. Highlights aired on SportsCenter. If you missed a game, you missed it. The biggest issues in college football at the time, TV rights and conference control. Sound familiar? Well, the headline's familiar, but the actual nuances of it were completely different. 1984's Supreme Court ruling, NCAA versus the Board of Regents, gave power to individual schools and conferences to negotiate their own TV contracts. This was the beginning of media revenue disparity. There was limited player mobility. Transfer rules were rigid. Players had to sit out a year without exception. Scandals? Well, SMU was just a year removed from receiving the NCAA's death penalty. By 1993, Lee Corso had been on the air for 6 years. But this is when College Game Day went live and on the road. The first campus site was South Bend. Florida State versus Notre Dame. Number 1 versus number 2. Game Day went from a show to an event, and Corso found his stage. What was happening in college football? Florida State versus Notre Dame was dubbed the game of the century. Game Day's first road show, November 13th, 1993. Notre Dame won 31-24, but Florida State still claimed the national title. National champion, Florida State. Heisman winner, Charlie Ward, Florida State's quarterback. Conferences were realigning. Penn State had just joined the Big Ten, and the SEC had added Arkansas and South Carolina. Top QB prospect, Heath Schuler. Freshman receiver at Michigan, a young Charles Woodson. The biggest issues in college football at the time, TV power shifts. Conferences were fighting for bigger broadcast deals, laying the groundwork for the eventual creation of conference networks. The Bowl Coalition to the Bowl Alliance. There's still no BCS or playoff. 1993 was part of the frustrating split title era. Voters, not games, decided champions. Scholarship limits dropped. The NCAA had just lowered scholarship limits from 95 to 85. The scandals at the time, well, big names like Miami and Alabama faced scrutiny over improper benefits. Players could be suspended or banned for a free meal. It happened on October 5th, 1996, Ohio State versus Penn State. Lee Corso reached under the desk, pulled out the Brutus Buckeye head, and put it on. No one knew it in the moment, but that would become one of the most iconic traditions in college football. That moment didn't just change the show, it changed Corso. The coach became the entertainer, and Saturday mornings haven't been the same since. What was going down in college football? Well, the national champion was Florida, led by the old ball coach. It was the first national title in school history, won by beating their rival Florida Florida State in the Sugar Bowl rematch. The Heisman winner was Danny Werfel, Florida's quarterback. Top players at the time: Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson, Warwick Dunn, and Jake Plummer. Game Day was exploding in popularity. 1996 had multiple live shows across major matchups. Where was the Game Day cast in 1996? Chris Fowler was the host of College GameDay, a role he held since 1990. Reese Davis was working as an anchor at ESPN2 and Sports Smash, having joined ESPN in 1995. He would not join College GameDay until 2015. Kirk Herbstreit had just joined College GameDay as a new analyst after a brief stint calling games for ESPN Radio. Desmond Howard was an active NFL player with the Green Bay Packers. He would win Super Bowl MVP the following season in '97 and would join ESPN as an analyst in 2005. Pat McAfee was 9 years old playing youth soccer in Pittsburgh, and David Pollock was a 14-year-old high school freshman in Georgia. Bill Clinton was the president, Independence Day was the top movie, and the Macarena was the top song by Los Del Rio. The internet was in about only 20% of US households. NCAA 97 on Sega Genesis was the peak of football gaming. Cell phones had antennas and Snake. The biggest issues in college football at the time: there was still no BCS. Bowl Alliance determined the national champ, but there was no unified title game. Michigan and Nebraska would share a title just 1 year later in '97. We had scholarship reductions and parity debates. Coaches were complaining that the 85 scholarship limits were making it harder for elite teams to dominate like the 80s. TV contracts were driving realignment talk. The Big 12 had just launched that year, which was a merger between the Big 8 and the Southwest Conference. By 2005, Game Day wasn't just part of college football, it was leading the national conversations. And that year, the conversation was simple: USC and Texas. Two undefeated teams, two Heisman winners, one perfect ending. But underneath that legendary Rose Bowl, the system was cracking. The year before, Auburn had gone undefeated and was left out. Mike Trangies, one of the BCS architects, said the vast majority of people would want a playoff. But this isn't about giving people what they want. This is about creating a model that works and is in the best interest, hopefully, of student athletes. Voters and computers still decided who played for the title then. But for one iconic night, Lee made us all forget about the issues.
USC. I've said all year, Texas is the most complete football team in this country. Tonight, they shocked the entire universe, not just the planet Earth, the universe. I'm going with Texas Longhorns. Hook up, Texas!
Quarter of the Rose Bowl here.
Reggie Bush was the Heisman winner that year. It was later vacated due to NCAA violations. Notable players at the time: we had Matt Leinart, Vince Young, Brady Quinn, and A.J. Hawk. The biggest issues in college football? Well, there was the residual controversy from 2004. The previous season saw an undefeated Auburn excluded from the national championship game, fueling debates about the BCS's fairness. Can you imagine the SEC getting left out today? SEC Commissioner Mike Slive remarked, "If Auburn goes through this league undefeated, they deserve to play for the national championship." There was also perceived inequities. Critics argue that the BCS favored teams from certain conferences, marginalizing others regardless of performance. The reliance on polls and computer rankings rather than on-field results was a focal point of the criticism, and the calls began for a playoff system. The controversies led to increased advocacy for a playoff format to determine the national champion. Discussions included proposals for an 8-team playoff or a +1 model, where a championship game would follow the bowl games. 38 seasons.
Not tonight, sweetheart. Give me that hand.
Over 430 headgear picks. One final pick.
Go Bulldogs!
Not so fast.
Midget.
I go with Harvard. What's the matter?
In 1987, Lee Corso joined a studio show that no one had ever heard of.
Wow! I told you. Wow, that had some kick. Everybody run for cover.
In 2025, he'll make his final pick after creating a national tradition that defines college football mornings.
I love Georgia, but that dog is ugly. Give me this thing here.
But the sport around him, it's almost unrecognizable. Let's check out how college football has changed since 1987. In 1987, the national champion was selected by polls, AP, and the coaches. In 2025, it's decided by a 12-team college football playoff. Player movement. In 1987, transfers were required to sit out a full season. In 2025, transfer portal allows instant eligibility. Multiple transfers are common. Player compensation. In 1987, a free meal could lead to NCAA violations. In 2025, players signed 6 or 7 seven-figure NIL deals, sometimes with formal agents. Conference realignment, in 1987, there was the classical regional conferences, at the Big 8, the Southwest Conference, the Pac-10. 2025, the original Pac-12's dissolved. The Big 10 and the SEC dominate national landscape. Media and coverage, in 1987, games aired on network TV with limited weekly exposure. In 2025, streaming platforms host major games. College GameDay is a full-scale touring production. Public perception, in 87, it was focused on tradition, pageantry, and amateurism. In 2025, it's increasingly viewed as a business. Terms like holdout, revenue sharing, and unionization are part of the conversation. Corso's all-time Headgear record is 286 and 144, a 66.5% win rate, including a perfect 17-0 when picking USC. His most picked teams are Ohio State 45 times, Bama 38, LSU 25, Florida 22, and Oregon 21. Corso has never picked against Navy in the Army-Navy game, honoring his time as an assistant coach at Navy. He helped transform Game Day from a studio show to a live Saturday morning tradition for the sport. It's outlasted multiple eras of college football, from the Bowl Coalition to NIL collectives. He became a unifying, joyful presence in a sport increasingly shaped by controversy and change. He's known for his catchphrases, "Not so fast, my friend," his unexpected picks, and his genuine love for the game. He represented the fan's voice on set, emotional, unpredictable, and unapologetically passionate.
First, I want to thank ESPN for sticking with me when I had my stroke. And then, second of all, a special shout out to Kirk's wife, Allison. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have had Brutus. And finally, to all my colleagues on the set for all these years, for putting up with me and my shtick. Thank you very much, and thank whoever put that up together. It means a lot to me.
Thanks, Coach. Hey, if you like this video, hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel, and check out the video on the very next frame, which is recommended just for you.